Good afternoon and welcome. Today, I think you've probably, if you've been sitting at this stage of retail sales in the US very soon, with Europe sort of following behind the US, but finance hasn't kept up with the pace of global e-commerce, which is why companies like Aidan's exist. Non-bank lenders that leverage companies' revenue so that they can access working capital when they need it in their supply chains. But on top of the financing aspect, there's also a few things that have also happened this year. A little bit of trade disruption you might have heard about, some Trump tariffs, and we've also got, as Web Summit's big theme this year, AI, which could potentially disrupt e-commerce further. So if you are a global e-commerce business, how can you navigate this disruptive landscape, but not only navigate it, but also survive and thrive? Aidan, let's start with Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people here aren't feeling that liberated as a result of it, but can you tell us, I mean, what products have got hit the hardest and what hasn't?
Sure. So a couple of products have been hit incredibly hard. First of all, products with a very high average order value. So one of the things that Trump did was remove the de minimis requirement, which meant that if you were shipping in a product that was less than $800 in value, you didn't pay tariffs. Now you do. So furniture, luggage, anything where there's a very high average order value, suddenly you're paying a tariff that you were not paying before. So that vertical specifically was getting hit very hard. The second relates to specific products that are pretty much only made in one location. And in that way, you were unable to diversify your supply chain. A good example is actually strollers or prams, where you have one town in China that makes the vast majority of all prams in the world. You have to take the hit on that tariff. There's no way to diversify your way out of that product. In contrast, you have apparel as an example, where you have lots of other locations in which you can spread your different suppliers. That actually wasn't hit half as hard. So it varies very much vertical by vertical, but the two that I would identify are very high average order values, where suddenly this de minimis requirement meant that you were taking a tariff. And the second would be very specific products that are only manufactured in one location.
And how are global, I don't know if we've got any pram manufacturers in the audience, but I'm just sort of wondering, how do you respond to, I mean, essentially Trump was flip-flopping. It was 20%, it was 50%. How do you adapt to that sort of, as an e-commerce company, how can you adapt to that kind of volatility?
Oh, so the first thing that most e-commerce companies did was they did a lot of ordering in Q1. So they definitely knew that some tariffs were coming, and we saw huge volumes in Q1. And then once the tariffs came in April, they performed really well from a revenue perspective, but there was very little inventory ordering happening from April, May, and June. And what was happening was negotiation with your suppliers. So they were gradually understanding what was the impact on demand, how can I negotiate prices with my suppliers, what's the tariff rate going to settle at, because the initial tariff rates were much higher than where they're at today. And so it really took about 3 months for everything to settle down. But most sophisticated e-commerce merchants had begun to diversify their exposure into different countries, which was quite unusual because they would think, for example, India is a great country at the beginning of the tariffs, and now India has a higher tariff today. So it was very hard to predict where you should place your bets because the individual country tariffs kept moving. And that's even still the case today.
I wonder if AI could help with that. We're going to get onto that a bit later. But I mean, who has been hit the hardest? Is it manufacturers, importers, us poor consumers that are having to pay for all of this?
Initially, it was definitely manufacturers and importers. That is now switching to consumers. So we are seeing most companies implementing a price increase at least 5% and often up to 12% to combat the impact of tariffs. So you are definitely seeing that transition to the consumer. because most of the goods that will be bought during Black Friday or during Christmas have been ordered since July. And that's really where the tariffs have begun to kick in. And so it will begin to transition to the consumer very quickly.
I wonder, I guess most people here are probably interested in some survival tips for navigating this really complex landscape. What advice can you give them?
The first thing is we were surprised at how willing manufacturers were to actually negotiate on terms and on price. So historically, it's quite hard to negotiate with manufacturers. They often have a lot of the cards. They were feeling a lot of pressure too. So we were surprised to see how much of the pain manufacturers were actually taking. So first of all, negotiating with your suppliers is kind of the first thing to do. Having a finance provider gives you some leverage, especially when you're talking to providers. You can make larger orders, which can bring down your price. So having a finance partner in place makes a massive difference. And the third thing is, once you get to any bit of scale, try to have at least 2 to 3 different locations from which you're ordering. You should probably have that anyway, but in particular when tariffs are moving from country to country pretty rapidly, it's nice to be able to adjust where your flows are coming from in a volatile environment.
And obviously, apart from Wayflyer, are there any other tools that you would recommend e-commerce companies seriously look at?
Yes, so there's 2 great tools I can recommend that relate to shipping. One is called Import Genius, and the other is called Import Yeti. And what it allows you to see is where other companies are sourcing their products from. So you can see their shipments for a specific company, you can see where they're shipping from and to. And sometimes you can actually see who the manufacturer is. So if you use those tools, if you have a competitor and you're wondering, how are they trying to navigate this, you can find out. So you can see oftentimes how their goods are flowing through. So you can actually see the other tactics that other companies are using in your market and how they're actually trying to negotiate the tariff situation.
And can you trust that information?
You can. It's based on the bill of lading that's attached to every single shipment. So it's based on the actual, it's public data. It's just very hard to parse, but you can absolutely trust it. It's very powerful.
Now we spoke about it. I mean, obviously AI is the big theme here. Yeah. How do you see it impacting e-commerce?
So the best thing that AI will do for e-commerce in the short term is it'll reduce operating costs. If you take a look at most e-commerce merchants that we work with, they use agencies a lot. They use agencies to run email marketing, they use agencies for creative, they use agencies for ad spend. A lot of that agency work is being taken away with AI. So today we see customers doing their own email segmentation. We see customers doing their own creative generation. A lot of those tasks where historically you were paying specialists, particularly in creative, that's all going to basically leave your operating costs. And that's going to be initially the big lever, I think, that e-commerce merchants are going to use. Your OpEx is going to come down.
So basically any website designers out there, it sounds a bit depressing because it sounds like e-commerce companies are going to be building their own websites with what? Low-code, no-code solutions?
They may be doing that or they may be using Shopify, but what's critical is your advertising campaigns, how you're doing creative, how you do customer segmentation. All of that work will be taken away by AI, and that's going to massively reduce the amount that you spend on contractors.
You've also, when we were speaking beforehand, you were talking about social platforms like Meta and TikTok Shop, and you were saying that they haven't really been successful.
No.
Why?
I think it's actually, it's hard to marry. If you think about Meta and you think about TikTok, what they're doing is they're generating demand. The platform that generates demand is not always the platform that satisfies demand. So Amazon will satisfy demand. It will, you want a green jumper, you can go buy it. You want a red truck, you can go buy it. Generating demand and satisfying demand at the same time is very hard. The interesting thing about ChatGPT satisfies demand. So it's more of a competitor to Google or Amazon than it is to Meta. Meta generates demand that isn't there. When you see a product in ChatGPT, it's because you're looking for it already. So where I see ChatGPT having an impact for e-commerce merchants is actually disrupting Google and Amazon as a channel rather than disrupting Meta or TikTok, because that's where they generate demand organically. When you have an idea as to what you want and what you want to buy, then you're disrupting Google and Amazon. So they're very different use cases, and oftentimes they don't compete with each other. But in this case, I think we think of ChatGPT as taking time off Meta. From an advertising perspective, it's more of a threat to Google and Amazon.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more? I mean, is it about lead generation that you think where ChatGPT is really going to move things forward, or?
It's more, when a customer wants a product, it will give you that answer straight away. The great thing that Meta does for small merchants is it allows you to pick a very specific audience. Even if you're not looking for a product, it'll actually show you that product. So it's generating demand from nothing. There's already demand when you search for a product on ChatGPT, and that's why Amazon and Google are really going to come under pressure from ChatGPT, and that part of your ad budget is going to change. I'm not sure your social spend is going to change that much.
And when you combine that with perhaps agentic AI, there was a panel earlier this morning here, so you could have, then an agent executing a transaction for you. How powerful do you think that will be for e-commerce?
I don't know yet, to be honest, because it's very hard to see how the major shopping platforms are going to deal with it. So last week, you might have seen Amazon blocking Perplexity from actually making purchases on their site. It's going to be very interesting to see how the shopping platforms allow or enable agents onto their platform, because right now I think they're a little skittish. So it's very hard to see how they're going to play out, especially with a lot of these shopping platforms being walled gardens. So it's very hard to predict how that's going to play out, to be honest, even in the short term.
Do you think agentic AI is overhyped as far as e-commerce goes?
It may not be overhyped, but it's not here yet to the same extent that we
what
expect.
Kind of sort of time frame are we looking at?
It could be months. It could be a year, but ultimately it will be down to how these major platforms play nicely with each other. So if you see Shopify agreeing a partnership with ChatGPT, which I did recently, that's an interesting combination. But it can create a lot of delays when you see friction between these platforms.
And I sort of wonder to what extent you think that AI will, because we're living in a very volatile time geopolitically, trade-wise. I mean, do you see a sort of future for sort of e-commerce firms where they'll be able to use these tools to really just spin on a dime, for want of a better description, and be able to repivot, I don't know, distribution, supply chains, even their financing on demand?
Well, I think e-commerce companies only know volatility. So they've had the Suez Canal blockage, they've had the iOS 14 problem with Meta, they've had huge shipment problems, they've had COVID, they've had the coming out of COVID. Everything, every year for an e-commerce company, there's always volatility. So they are the most resilient set of founders, much more resilient than I've ever seen. So I would always back them. Even this year with tariffs, we were shocked at how well they were able to negotiate it. And it's because you're a global business from day one. You set up an e-commerce company in your bedroom, you're a global business. You are affected by tariffs, you're affected by interest rates, you're affected by commodity prices. That's very unusual for a business doing $10,000 a month in sales. So they're incredibly resilient. And when you bear that in mind, I would never back against them. They're also very tech forward. So if there's even a hint of an edge from a new technology, they'll adopt it incredibly quickly. So the future is bright for e-commerce, and because they're such early adopters, initially at least, I think their unit economics are going to improve because of the AI savings on OpEx I mentioned earlier.
And what about, I mean, you're a non-bank lender to global e-commerce firms. I mean, how is AI going to innovate around the financing aspect of global e-commerce?
It allows us to underwrite much faster. So when a customer comes in and they're looking for up to $500,000 in financing, we can often underwrite same day, and that money can go out the door. We can't do that without AI, because AI automates a lot of the manual back office processes that you would typically have people doing in the past. It does incredible amounts of manual processing today instantly. So for example, if you send me a PDF of your bank statements, AI will pull all of that data and immediately transfer it into a database without error, straight away for processing. If you didn't have that, there's a lot of manual entry that needs to happen. So for us, it's about getting your answer faster and more accurately, but it creates that magic moment of being underwritten almost instantly.
I mean, do you see it getting to a point where if I want $500,000 or $1 million, that could be underwritten in seconds?
It can be seconds potentially, but certainly minutes. Yeah.
And that's happening now, or that will happen soon?
We can do some in minutes, but ultimately you would be looking at like an hour or two of a turnaround time.
I guess if you're doing it in seconds or minutes, there's always a concern about fraud.
There is a little bit, but ultimately, if you're looking for 500,000, oftentimes an hour or two is.
6.
Yeah, so I think e-commerce is going to rebound from, I think, a difficult 2 or 3 year period, and we're seeing that in valuations already. We've seen companies like Current Body list in the UK recently. I think it's going to happen for a couple of reasons, but primarily AI is going to be an accelerator. It's going to make it much easier and much cheaper for you to launch and test new products and new campaigns. And also new channels like ChatGPT are going to hopefully make sure that there's more competition among the ad platforms, which makes sure that we have lower CPMs when we're spending money on advertising. So I think it's very positive right now, and it actually plays into the hands of smaller brands ahead of bigger brands, because they tend to be early adopters of new technologies.
So what would be your final words of advice for somebody setting up an e-commerce business in their bedroom today?
I would say challenge yourself to see how far you can get with no employees and no contractors, because you can create a world-class site with world-class creative for a couple of subscriptions a month. And I think that's going to be the future for it. I'd be very positive.
Aidan, thank you so much.
Thanks, Anita.